That's great.
All right, we're good to go then. Thanks, Barry. So we're going to start with the land acknowledgement as always. We respectfully acknowledge that we are located in the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississauga or Mississauga and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaty First Nations, which includes Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. We respectfully acknowledge that the Williams Treaty First Nations has been stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters, and that today remain vigilant over the health and integrity for generations to come. We're all treaty people. All right, well, thanks everyone for coming out tonight for our AGM. So I guess we'll just jump right into business. Next slide. So I'd like to put a motion forward for the approval for the past minutes for our AGM last year. So we'll need someone to put their hand up and okay. And we'll need a seconder as well. Okay, thank you. All in favor? Okay. Folks on Zoom there, you can put your vote down. Nice. Good job. All right, perfect. You'll have to minimize the poll. Okay, so thank you for that. So next I'd like to call up Chris to present the financial report for 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, in case I forget at the end, I just want to say that right here. I am always available if anybody ever has any questions about our finances. I'm either at the back of this room or you can easily reach me by email. There's no secrets in our finances, so I'm always happy to talk to you about them or answer questions. Okay, I guess we can get to the next slide, Marina. Okay, so let's start just looking at the money. On the left is the money that came in. So last year, both donations and memberships were up a bit. And interestingly, it's almost an even split between the two. That's the two biggest pieces of the pie there is donations and memberships. The little skinny slices is some bank interest and our little bit of fundraising. We do book sales and auctions at the back. Okay, and then the really colorful pie chart on the right there is what we're spending the money on. So I'm happy to say the biggest piece of the pie is always our charitable giving. So that's the scholarship, the awards we give to schools, and the donations we make to other charities. And then the next biggest slice last year was our purchase of the Modus system, which I'll talk a little bit more in a couple minutes. Then we've got these meetings, which is the rent we pay the library and the cost of our Zoom subscription. And then we've got furlough expenses, printing and postage, administration, which is all the bank fees, office supplies, software. And then the orange one is Canada Helps. And maybe not everybody knows what that's about. That's our data management system. And it does a lot of things for us. It handles our tax receipts, all of our member records. It lets people use credit card payments, and it's our bulk email system. So every time you get an email that Marina sent out, it's through the Canada Help system. Okay, and then insurance, that's our liability insurance. And the last thinnest slice is the cost of the website and marketing, which is posters, business cards, etc. Okay, next slide, please, Marina. Okay, so we donated to these same charities as the previous year. And if you're not familiar with any of these charities, I would encourage you to go back to last year's curlews, because Whitney wrote some wonderful profiles about each and every one of them. She went and visited them in person and wrote some really good articles. You can always get back to the old curlews through the website. Okay, next. Okay, so our education awards. That's our scholarship winner, Emily Goodall. And I think she's at Algonquin College now studying biotechnology. And then we also gave 3 grants to some of the local public schools, Kent, Smithfield, and Gummo. Okay, next. Okay, the MODIS system. Hopefully everybody's heard at least something about this by now. So it was a project that we worked on for about 2 years, and it was installed last November. So that photo, the technician from Birds Canada, you can't tell in that photo, but it was a blizzard that day. It was snowing so heavily, and it was so windy. But he told me that he'd just come from Saskatchewan, so this was nothing. So, so we paid half of the cost, the $3,175, and Community Power Northumberland donated the rest. And it really is a good project in that the town itself has donated the space. They have the boat storage. They're covering the cost of utilities. And Birds Canada itself is covering the maintenance costs and any liabilities. So we are not liable for anything that happens with this tower. And sorry, I should back up for a second. MODIS, if you were not familiar, it's a system of putting very tiny radio tags on animals, birds, bats, and some insects. And then the radio tower can pick up their signal if they come within, I think it's like 10 to 15 kilometers of the tower, maybe 20 kilometers on a really crystal clear day. So we are really hoping that in the coming months, with spring migration, that something's going to ping the tower. And we will immediately be able to get some data about whatever that creature is and what project is, put a tag on it. Okay, I guess my last slide. Okay, this is exactly the same slide I've shown you before. This is regarding our obligations to the government as a registered charity. So because our revenue is way under $100,000, we are not required to do an external audit. Not a full audit, not a review engagement. We don't have to do those things. And you can see how expensive they are. The cheapest option starts at $2,500 and goes way up. So what we would like to do, the government allows us to waive the need for this process as long as we get approval from the membership. So once again, I'm strongly recommending that this is the route to go, that we should waive the need for an external audit. It's not a good use of our funds. And as a club, we have really straightforward finances. We have no debt. We don't own any property. We have like one bank account, no credit cards. It's really straightforward. So I'm going to recommend that we waive this, and I'll get to a motion for it shortly. So before I move on, are there any questions about this particular issue? Because it is important. Okay. Okay. And for the record, I actually brought it with me today. I keep a binder of every scrap of paper, every bank statement, every receipt. It's all in a binder, and it's also all uploaded digitally to my bookkeeping software. So we're keeping good records. Okay, so I think the first one I have to do is, can I get someone to have give us a motion to accept the 2025 financial report? Frank, thank you, Craig. And seconder? Richard Pope. Okay, all in favor? Thank you very much. Okay, and then lastly, can we have a motion to waive the external audit, please? Brian Maxwell. And a seconder?
John Davidson.
There we go, thank you. All in favor? Thank you very much. Okay, that's it for me. Again, anytime you have questions, please just ask.
Thank you very much, Chris. So next on our agenda would be my brief president's report here. So a lot of this Chris has already gone over, but sort of as a formality, I'll list the some of the things that the club has done this year, just so we can get an approval for that. So one of these items would be one $1,000 scholarship awarded, as we saw, and 3 $500 environmental grant awards, and 5 donations of $250 each to those local nature charities that we saw in Chris's presentation. And in addition to that, the Willow Beach Field Naturalist has been engaged with the following local community-driven initiatives through volunteers from the club. And these were all, for the most part, reported on in the Curlew. So I'll go over them just in brief here. So we had the Modus installation in the Coburg Harbor. We've had volunteers at the Coburg Farmers Market, the Hastings Waterfront Festival, presentation to Boomers Club at Coburg Public Library, a presentation at Hastings Public Library, Great Lakes Coastal Cleanup, our ongoing participation in advisory groups such as the Northumberland County Forest, Ganaraska Forest, and the Rice Lake Plains Partnership, and our continued support of Ontario Nature and their conservation initiatives, work in consultation at Wesleyville, and our continued stewardship at Peters Woods. So I'd like to put a motion forward then to approve this president's report for 2025. Second.
All right.
Okay. Yes, please. Gotcha. And second? Motion to carry? Motion carried.
All in favor?
All in favor? Thank you. Okay, so next I'd like to call Frank Gotts. Yep.
Thank you, Matt. This is the part of the evening that you've all been looking forward to, I know. So we have, I'm going to read something that Whitney gave me here. As a registered charity, our club is required to hold annual elections with staggered 2-year terms, ensuring a blend of continuity and fresh perspectives on our board. So as you can see, there's a list of names for board members: Matt Mayer, Vice President Ann Brightman, Secretary Maria Scaza, Treasurer Chris Ito, Past President Whitney Lake, Director Gregor Binkley, who's a new appointment, Director Lindsay Fleur, Director Richard Girardin, Director Dan Hallett, another new one, and then Director Shelley Irvin, and then Director Jenny Jackman.
They're all here tonight.
They're all here tonight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank some of the people that are stepping down. Departing members, I want to celebrate their outstanding service and commitment. Jerry McKenna, Michael Maynard, and Anne Marie Jackson as they transition from the board. A returning member, Richard Girardin, has agreed to serve another term, which is a 2-year term. He's conveniently skiing in British Columbia at the moment, I think. Yeah, so continuing his valuable role as our outing lead of the board. And continuing board members, Marina Scaza, Jenny Jackman, Lindsay Fleur, and Chris Ito are currently halfway through their terms and will continue to contribute their expertise and dedication to WBFN in 2026 and 2027 a little bit. Additionally, Matt Mayer will remain as president and Whitney Lake as past president, providing leadership and continuity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask if anyone in the audience would like to put their name forward. And we do this all the time, even though ample notice has been given for the production of the slate before you. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to put their name forward for the board position? Hearing none, I will now ask for a motion to confirm the slate of candidates for election. I need a motion to accept the slate as presented by the board of directors. Do I have a motion? Eric. Thank you. I have a seconder. Richard. Yes, Richard. All in favor? Looks like it's unanimous. Okay, motion passed. I guess that's it, Rita, eh?
Yeah, unless you, maybe the newly elected.
Oh, yes, I forgot. The newly elected board members, would you like to put your hand up or if you have a lot of courage, stand up? Yeah. So at this time, I'll invite Elizabeth to come up.
Get that off the floor.
So nobody's sightings.
We have had several unusual birds in the area this last month. So Marina has some of them very conveniently posed. This is a tufted duck. The tufted duck has been regular in Coburg Harbor. Richard, has it been there today?
This is the first day.
Oh, no.
13 days going to days.
Yeah, and this is a Eurasian species. Katsu reports that he's seen lots of them in Japan. But it's pretty unusual in Coburg Harbor. And it's fairly close, when it's there, it's fairly close to the docks. And it's the tuft on the top of its head is really obvious. You know, the day we saw it, it was blowing in the wind, so it was really difficult to miss. And it'll be sitting in with a group of scaup. It's about the same size. Yeah. So that's one worth looking for because it's been around a while. Then a mountain bluebird put in a one-day appearance just west of Port Hope. A lot of people tried to look for it and were unsuccessful. I don't know whether everybody knows that there are 3 species of bluebirds in North America. The one that's usually here is the eastern bluebird. Mountain bluebird is, the male is all blue. The female is kind of washed out blue-gray. But this one was, I think, was a male, but it was just there for a day. And many people went to look for it. Sometimes the birds' compasses get mixed up and they get in the wrong place. It is fairly common. I saw them in Banff. It's in the intermountain valleys. Western bluebird doesn't wander as much, but the mountain does. And the harlequin duck has been regularly seen in Port Hope Harbor since about December, I think. It's been there a long time. This is a male. Harlequin duck is more common on the west coast, but there is a population that breeds in the Ungava Peninsula, and the ones that turn up here are usually Ungava Peninsula birds. And this one This one's been quite regular and it's a really pretty male. Females aren't nearly as interesting. But it's worth looking, having a look for because it's been seen this week. At the mouth of the Ganaraska. It's, if the fishermen don't chase it away, but anyway, doesn't seem to have been bothered by them. Also in the harbor, a white-winged scoter. Again, we saw that when we saw the tufted duck. So then you maybe see others as well. And the redhead, little flock of redhead. There's several waterfowl species that we may see on the lake that are coming in now. The Presqu'île Waterfowl Festival is the 14th and 15th of March. So who knows what the ice conditions will be and whether the birds will have left, but it's hard to program those things. And they're still seeing lots of evening grosbeaks. Are you, Marina?
Less than before, but we're still getting them.
Marina's going broke this winter because there's lots of them at their feeder and they're fairly big birds, so they eat a lot. Yeah. So we're hoping that on Sunday, when we have the bird feeder tour, that we'll see a few of them anyway. There are a couple of places that are pretty regular. And there have been a few common redpolls in the forest, not so many, but and they may be a little harder to find, but they might be at a feed or two. They were in the tamaracks, yeah, in the Northumberland forest at the, what's that trail? Carstairs Trail. And that's it. Anybody else have anything exciting that they want to report? So, yes, no? Yeah. By the time I see you again, oh, John. Yeah?
We had a couple of red-winged blackbirds at our feeders earlier this week, but 3 weeks earlier than normal.
Did they hang around, Tom? Yeah?
Don't come on them on Sunday. Yes, not red-winged black.
But by the time I see you again at the end of March, there'll probably be lots of them, and there'll be everybody's favorite bird, the common grackle. We only like them in March because it's a sign of spring. Yeah. I'd like to have Dawn. Where's Dawn? Dawn Davis. When is the eclipse? There's an eclipse of the moon coming up this week in a couple of days.
Yes, March the 3rd. It peaks at 6:33 in the morning, but starts before then.
So we want to stay up all night.
Or wake up early.
March the 3rd, in the middle of the night, there will be an eclipse of the moon.
Moonbow.
Yeah, there we go.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Also, I think the 28th, which is tomorrow, all the planets are aligning for the first time and won't again for another 40 years or so. I don't know what we're supposed to be able to see, but it might be worth looking into. Happy Polar Bear Day. Today is International Polar Bear Day, so I don't know what that means, but anyway, happy Polar Bear Day. Okay, so this past Tuesday, we finally got to do our winter nature walk. We've had so much trouble scheduling outings the latter part of January and through February because of either too much snow or really cold temperatures. So we went out on Tuesday. It was a beautiful day. It was a little bit nippy, a little bit cold. We had a small group of 6 people, but we did our walk and we found a bunch of different kinds of tracks, mink, deer, 2 kinds of squirrels, a mouse, coyote. We learned the difference between mouse tracks and vole tracks. And we also had a bald eagle fly over. So this was over at Goodrich Loomis. I don't know if you folks have been that way, but it's a lovely conservation area with some great trails and the creek. There's a beautiful Cold Creek runs through it, and it's a really great spot. Except don't go in the summertime because the mosquitoes are unbearable. Oh. Okay, coming up, we have a bunch of things lined up. All weather permitting, of course, but hopefully the weather is getting better now. So Sunday we have the previously scheduled bird feeder tour, which we did have to cancel for bad weather, which turned out to be a lovely day. So Sunday, we are meeting at Wooden Trailhead at 8:30 in the morning. We are going to make approximately 7 stops around the Northumberland County Forest. We have, we're going to go to a few people's houses where they have fairly active feeders. We are ultimately going to end up at Jenny and Tom's house near, between Centerton and Castleton. And they have graciously invited us there for lunch. So if you're participating in this outing.
A polite lunch of soup.
Soup, fresh bread, and treats. So if you are going to join us and you haven't already told me you're coming, please let me know. Because of course, if you don't get any soup. So, we want to make sure we have enough for everybody, so please let us know if you're coming. So 8:30 at Woodland Trailhead, just email me tonight, let me know, or before you leave tonight, just tap me on the shoulder and tell me you're coming, and we will make sure there's enough for everybody. So that is Sunday. March 22nd, we're planning a waterfowl outing. So as Elizabeth mentioned, the Presskill Waterfowl Weekend is March 14th to 15th. A lot about your timing for waterfowl has to do with the ice that's on the lake. So if there's too much ice, they're too far out for you to see anything. So we're hoping and expecting that by March 22nd, we will have good views of waterfowl. So while I hope this date isn't to be adjusted, this is the date we're going with for now. March 25th, we have booked a private tour of the Ontario Turtle Conservation Centre. So this outing required registration. We have a maximum of 25 people and it's $5 a head. We're going to ask you to pay $5 a head, or they're going to ask you to pay $5. We're going to meet in down here and carpool up to Peterborough, which is where the conservation center is. So this would be a cool opportunity to do an outing indoors, so we're not, dependent on the weather, and see what goes on behind the scenes with how they heal the turtles that might have been hit by cars and the various things that can happen to those poor creatures, and how they feed them and maintain them and get them ready to be released the following year. So that will be a very interesting outing. April 22nd is Earth Day, and like last year, Jenny's going to be scheduling a cleanup day at Wesleyville. So later on, towards the beginning of April, there'll be a call for volunteers for that. May 9th, the Northumberland, the Nature Conservancy Canada is hosting Hazelbird Day at Hazelbird. We are going to participate. Chelsea Marcantonio is a member of the club. She works for the NCC, and we are invited to participate. So it's a very family-friendly event. There'll be walks and guided tours and birding and so on. So more to come on that. And at the beginning of May sometime, we are going to do a Spring Ephemerals walking Kenilworth Woods. Now that's in west of Port Hope, down by the lake. Susan Casson is going to lead that. Date is TBD, and it'll probably be short notice because with the volume of snow that we have this year, the awakening of the ephemerals could be a little bit later, depending on how long it takes for the snow to melt. So that date, we're thinking it'll be around the 8th or 10th of May, but who knows what's going to happen with the snow. And likewise for spring migration, that will be on the fly, as catching a good day for finding all of the new birds that are coming in is very much wind and weather dependent. So we will do an outing in early May, again, likely around the 8th or the 10th, but we don't know for sure until we check all the wind and weather reports closer to the date. So are there any questions about the outings? Hey, don't forget to tell me if you're coming on Sunday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marina. As always, some excellent outings coming up. I'm going to introduce then our speaker for the night. So the title for tonight's presentation is Foraging Beyond the Trees, Managing Eastern Whippoorwills in a Dynamic Nutrient Landscape. And our speaker is Richard Feldman. So Richard is a research scientist in the Wildlife Research and Monitoring section of the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, based in Peterborough. At the OMNR, he directs research projects focused on conserving grassland birds and their habitats and developing restoration and conservation planning tools. Richard has a bachelor's degree from Queen's and a master's from the University of British Columbia. He then obtained a PhD from McGill studying hummingbird nectar relationships. He followed with his postdoctoral appointments at Trent University and the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Richard then took a faculty position at the Yucatan Center for Scientific Research in Merida, Mexico, where his research focused on bird migration and the effects of urbanization on overwintering migratory bird assemblages. In 2022, he moved back to Canada to take his current position with the OMNR. So with that being said, welcome, Richard.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for sticking around. Hear me okay? Yes, thanks everyone for sticking around, and thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to get to know you and share with you some of the work I've been doing in the past few years as a research scientist with the Ministry of Natural Resources. So we're just waiting for my talk to come up. Sharing. So the subject of my talk is Eastern Whippoorwill. I'm going to begin by talking about grassland ecosystems in Ontario, grassland population in Ontario. Are you seeing it on your computer?
It's hung here. Yeah, nothing's clicking. Computer's hung. Oh, there we go. Yeah, it's.
Okay.
It's way behind. It's trying to catch up to me.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. Okay.
It should be coming up any second. This is really slow.
Yeah, not I won't be able to
There.
advance the slides.
Sit right there. It should be on the.
Yeah,
Is the. Yeah, I think it's just
it's just, yeah, a lag, right?
it's on the leg. So why don't I run it?
Okay, you can go to the next slide. All right, so I'm gonna talk about, start talking about grassland ecosystems. So grassland's not a system you normally associate with the Ministry of Natural Resources. After all, it was just until recently, we were known as the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And with good reason, forests are the dominant vegetation type in most of the province. So the map up in the corner there, all that orange are areas dominated by forests. In the bigger map, all the orange you see are grasslands. So if you're like me, you're probably squinting and you're like, where's that orange? That's because, Ontario is not Saskatchewan. Nonetheless, grasslands are naturally occurring. So you can go to the next slide. Grasslands are naturally occurring, but they're small, they're fragmented, and they're scattered. So as we can see in the zoom here of Northumberland County. But nonetheless, grasslands are one of the ecosystems and contribute to ecosystem diversity here in the province. And I'm sure many of you here can attest to the unique set of flora and fauna that are in Southern Ontario grasslands. So I don't know if anyone here can tell me about some of the grasslands in Northumberland. Actually, I was talking to Matt about the tallgrass prairie he's restoring in Northumberland Forest. But are there some other large grassland conservation areas?
Alderman Black Oak Savannah.
Yeah, I've actually heard of that one. And then these sort of really cool species people have seen in local grasslands.
The upland sandpipers.
Upland sandpipers. Yeah, that's awesome. So I think, if we were to lose our grassland patches, our local biodiversity would be greatly impoverished. So what do I mean by, you can go to the next slide. So what do I mean by grasslands? I've sort of been using it as a catch-all term and using it for vaguely and loosely. It kind of refers to a collection of ecosystems that are all characterized by having less than 60% tree cover. So 60% tends to be the demarcation between forest and non-forest environments. My colleagues in the Ministry of Natural Resources have created a data product called the Ontario Land Cover, where they've mapped the dominant vegetation type in 15-meter by 15-meter pixels or grid cells across the province. And in that exercise, they've come up with 7 different of these sort of grassland or open ecosystem types. And I'm sort of just using grasslands to refer to all of them in a general sense. A little bit later, I will be talking about Alvar, because I do work in the Carden-Alvar region. So named because Alvar is one of the dominant grassland types in that region. So here's a zoom into a part of the Alvar, and all that yellow is Alvar ecosystems. Okay, next. My own interest in grasslands stems from the fact that they are emblematic of how disturbance regimes affect ecosystem structure and function. So disturbance tends to have a negative connotation to it, but they do include a lot of natural processes like fire, grazing, flooding, can also include wind and ice. And they're characterized by operating with a certain frequency, so it's about how often they operate, and with a certain intensity, so the amount of change they cause in the vegetation. And so here in this kind of figure here, we can see how the combination of, in this case, fire frequency and fire intensity kind of influence what kind of ecosystems we see on the landscape. We combine that with an energy gradient. So going from low energy regions, which could be our polar regions or more arid regions, going into higher energy, moister, more tropical regions. And so these kind of the fire frequency, fire intensity combines with the kind of general energy or kind of temperature or aridity in an area to influence what kind of ecosystems we see. So where fire is frequent, but not very intense, that's when we have grasslands, and also in sort of lower energy regions like the northern latitudes, like where we are in Ontario. What I like about the figure, it shows that if we are to just make slight changes in the disturbance regime, then we're going to switch what kind of ecosystem we have. So what's been happening recently in Ontario is that our fires have become more intense, and the frequency of fires has diminished over time, although it's maybe changing very more frequent most recently. And so a lot of our grasslands have been being converted into woodlands and shrublands. So woody vegetation is allowed to establish, and that's how we're losing grasslands. Of course, grasslands are also associated with our most settled parts of the country, most settled parts of the provinces. So some grasslands are just being outright destroyed and being converted into agriculture and residential development. So grasslands are kind of suffering directly from human influence, from just complete replacement, and also indirectly by the way humans are changing the disturbance regimes. The next slide. So that's why grasslands are some of the most imperiled ecosystems in Canada and in Ontario, and include the species, threatening the species that inhabit those systems, like our grassland birds, bobolink and eastern meadowlark, are both threatened in Ontario. These birds are already at risk because they're vulnerable to extinction because the systems in which they live are so small and fragmented, and any further habitat loss is just going to push them to the brink of local extinction. And so here, this is Birds Canada's most recent State of Canada's Birds report. And we can see that of all the kinds of birds, groups of birds we have, it's grassland birds that have been declining most precipitously since 1970. This is across Canada, but it's probably the same just looking in Ontario as well. Okay, next. To halt and reverse these worrying trends requires managing grasslands, not in isolation, but part of the mosaic that includes all the ecosystems that surround it, mostly forests and wetlands. In ecology, we now talk about meta-ecosystems as a way of making explicit that flows of energy and matter between ecosystems, they link the ecosystems, and they're vital to the sustenance of each component ecosystem. So here, for example, for a long time, we know that species move across different landscapes. They might be moving from one forest patch to another forest patch, but they might actually be using the intervening grasslands while doing that. And now we're adding to kind of decades and decades of understanding how species move across ecosystems and across landscapes. We're now adding in understanding about ecosystem processes, including resource flows like nutrients. And so this picture here is showing how resources or nutrients are moving between the terrestrial and aquatic environments. And this is really where I've been situating my research recently in understanding what kind of flows of energy and matter there are between forests and grasslands, and how that contributes to maintaining healthy bird populations or grassland bird populations, including our friend the eastern whippoorwill. The next slide. So is there? It's probably going to have. Is there like a volume? I forgot to turn up the volume for the presentation. Is that possible? Anyways, you can just play the slide. It might just have some noise to it.
Okay. Is it?
Oh, okay. So there's our eastern whippoorwill. Anyone familiar with this species can give some insight into its biology?
Nightjar family.
What's that? Nightjar family. So what does that imply?
It's nocturnal.
It's nocturnal, right? So the eastern whippoorwill, this is mostly what it's doing during the day, kind of rummaging around in the leaf litter under the forest canopy. So it's camouflage, it's kind of benefiting from the camouflage of the leaf litter. But as Marina said, it is a nocturnal bird. And as a nocturnal bird, and as a bird, birds are visual predators. So to be an effective forager, it needs light. And that means it's foraging under moonlight and when light is not obscured by having a forest canopy. So next slide. So the whippoorwill spends its days in the forest. And it's also where it nests. It puts nests in the forest, so it also benefits from the camouflage. But at night, it's out foraging over open areas. So it's constantly moving back between the forest and the grassland. And so it's really an ideal species to start understanding these flows of energy and matter between forests and grasslands, because it's a species that depends on both systems. Next slide. We can see that play out here with a large-scale study of eastern whippoorwill across a large swath of the eastern US, where researchers put out autonomous recording units. So these are devices that record birdsong. So they put them out at hundreds of sites across eastern US. And they showed that the probability of one of these devices picking up a whippoorwill increases with the amount of forest cover surrounding one of these sites, one of these black dots. That's the figure E here, but also increases with the amount of herbaceous vegetation cover surrounding one of these black dots here. So the whippoorwill requires both forests and herbaceous sort of grasslands. And well, we're losing these kind of mosaics across the region here, but extending into Ontario. So next slide. So this is why the eastern whippoorwill is declining through most parts of its range, or almost everywhere in its range. These are all the red dots. Everyone familiar with eBird?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is analysis of eBird data from the Cornell Lab for Ornithology. And you can find these products, these kind of analysis products on the eBird website. So all the red dots declines from more than 30% between 2012 and 2022, the breeding populations. Something else to draw your attention to is that the size of the dot corresponds to the size of the population in 2017. And some of those biggest dots are in, Eastern Ontario. The map is somewhat incomplete. There's actually a lot of whippoorwill here in southwestern Ontario too. I'm not sure how they missed part of this. But nonetheless, yeah, some of the biggest populations and some of the most steepest declining populations are right here in Ontario. So the actions we take here could benefit the species across its range. Okay, next slide. So there is, it's going to just put some arrows and things. You can just, keep going. So above and beyond the just straight habitat loss, kind of going alongside that are changes to its prey source. So whippoorwills are part of the aerial insectivore group. So these are birds that forage on insects flying in the air. So they include swallows and swifts and whippoorwill's cousin, the common nighthawk. So this likely, and so of all the other groups besides grassland birds, is aerial insectivores that are declining very steeply as well since 1970. So this indicates there's probably something going on with its prey, with the insect prey. And so to understand whippoorwill, next slide. The story of whippoorwill is really a story about moths, like these 4 fine individuals here. So moths are the main flying insect or insect flying at night. So they end up making about 80 to 90% of the whippoorwill diet. And if we want to understand what affects quantity and quality of moths as a resource for eastern whippoorwill, we need to look at the mix of nutrients in the diet that form the diet of moths. Well, as caterpillars, because they're foraging mostly as caterpillars. And particularly nitrogen. So next slide. That's because nitrogen limits how fast insects grow and how fast their populations grow, because nitrogen is in very short supply in ecosystems. So the figure here on the right is a collection of published and unpublished data looking at the elemental composition of plant tissue in green and terrestrial invertebrate tissue in orange. And all of this for plants, it expresses that elemental composition as a ratio of carbon to nitrogen. So there's a lot of variation here for plants, but on average, in plant tissue, in foliar tissue, in the leaves, there's about 36 carbon atoms for every nitrogen atom. So plants are mostly carbon. But in terrestrial invertebrates, on average, there's about 6.5 carbon atoms for every nitrogen atom. So there's a lot more kind of equal representation of carbon and nitrogen in vertebrate tissue. And that's why insects are such voracious defoliators, because they need to eat a ton of plant tissue to get enough nitrogen to incorporate into their own biomass. And so overcoming this elemental imbalance, plants are mostly carbon, but invertebrates and insects included are much more equal between carbon and nitrogen. Overcoming that imbalance has far-reaching consequences to insect growth, the way insects interact with other species, and the rates at which nutrients recycle into the ecosystem. Okay, next slide. So there's a lot of variation in that carbon-nitrogen ratio among plants. Part of that variation is actually spatially within a landscape. So some of those ecosystem processes we talked about, and some of those processes that move elements across ecosystems and in between different ecosystems, like the movement of animals, weathering of bedrock, mixing of ground and surface water. These all create kind of hot and cold spots, the availability of different elements in the soil. So you can see that in this little picture here in the bottom, where there's kind of hot spots of nitrogen, cold spots of nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, all sorts of elements. And then differences in the rates at which those elements are assimilated to plant tissue creates this heterogeneous nutrient landscape within which herbivores like insects forage. Now, next slide. I'm actually more interested in how that nutrients change through time, because one of the kind of defining characteristics of temperate terrestrial forests is that the availability of nitrogen in leaves declines over the growing season. So here's some data from a forest outside of Montreal. And the solid lines of black with the dots is the concentration of nitrogen in leaves. And it shows how it declines across these three tree species here as growing degree days accumulates. That's as we get deeper into summer. And so it declines quite steeply for the first part of summer. The dotted line with squares is a measure of its leaf toughness. It's another indicator of leaf palatability to herbivorous insects like caterpillars. So that toughness increases over the course of the summer. So in late summer, the plants are deficient in nitrogen and just physically more tougher. And so that's why we see, if we look at beech, for example, the black dots are where the kinds of leaves that we see caterpillars on, and the yellow, the open squares and open dots are where caterpillars are absent. So this is really interesting because it means in late summer, the leaves of most trees are just not good enough food source for most insects, yet they must persist and find food somewhere. And so I'm curious about what are the implications to this, to animals that require those insects, like birds and eastern whippoorwill. Okay, so next slide. So all this informs the research that I'm going to be talking about the rest of the talk, where I'm asking, so against this backdrop of declining foliar nitrogen, what kind of nutrient landscapes do whippoorwills encounter at different points during the summer? So whippoorwill are migratory. They start coming up in May. They breed through June and July. They prepare for fall migration through August and beginning of September. And they usually start migrating south in late September and early October. Next slide. So to answer this question, I started a research project in the Cardin-Alvar ecosystem. Anyone here familiar with Cardin-Alvar?
Yes.
Yeah, probably most people. It's such a well-known birding hotspot because of the large expanse of Alvar. So there's a lot of upland sandpipers there for sure. But if you're unfamiliar, so it is just east of Lake Simcoe in Aurelia, about an hour and 15 minutes northwest of Peterborough. It is a mix of mostly Alvar, but there's some, we see here some meadows and shrublands and are classified as barren or sparse treed systems mixed in with different kinds of forests. And so Alvar has a bedrock of limestone, and what characterizes Alvar is that rock is right up at the surface. So it's a very thin soil layer, and we couple that with so that means that any snow melt and all the water that comes in spring just kind of stays on the surface. So it's quite flooded in the spring, but then with hot summers, it just dries out like that. So there's this intense flooding to drought cycle, and that all limits the establishment of woody vegetation and keeps it mostly with an herbaceous cover. And so there's a lot of unique wildflowers and grasses in these systems. So for our work, we worked in 3 major land parcels outlined in black. The polygon there to the south in the map is Cardin-Alvar Provincial Park. So there is a park there, but it's not an operating park. It's not open to the public. I don't think most people realize that Ontario Parks has property there. And there's actually grazing there because it was grandfathered in for the owner that donated the land. The other parcels, the one just outside the park, it's a bunch of polygons there, but it's one property all owned by the Nature Conservancy of Canada called Prairie Smoke Blue Stem. And the other rectangle there to the top is also a Nature Conservancy of Canada property called North Bear. So across these 3 properties, I should just say grateful to Ontario Parks and for Nature Conservancy of Canada for having me work on their land, collaborating these projects. So across these 3 parcels, we established kind of 15 points where our goal was to sample leaves and moths at various points during the summer so we can analyze their elemental composition, see how the quality of leaves changes through the summer and how that affects the composition of the moths. Okay, so next slide. So here are Jacob and Haley, summer students from 2023, showing off a bucket trap. Has anyone used one of these before? Are there mothers in the group? Any moth fans? Maybe. So the way this trap works is there's a UV light attached to this 19-liter bucket. It turns on at dusk. It attracts moths to the light. They all kind of come in and they all fall into the bucket where they're euthanized by acetate, which is kind of strong nail polish remover. So not really toxic to us, but it is to the moths. The light turns off at dawn, and assistants like Jacob and Haley come and take out the moths from the traps. At the same time, we're collecting leaves from shrubs and small trees in the vicinity of the trap. And so we did this we tried to visit every week through the summer, but just because of various things happening, or we ended up going about 10 to 17 repeat visits to each of these 15 points. And we started as close to leaf out as we could and went till beginning of October, kind of about the time whippoorwill was leaving south. Once we had the samples, next slide, we brought them back to the lab. This is to Paul Frost's lab. He's a professor in the biology department at Trent, and he's a collaborator on this project. He owns one of these elemental analyzers. So I had an undergraduate student at the time, Anna Singh. She took back the samples, she ground them up, just use a coffee grinder. And then you just put them into the elemental analyzer and it spits out how much carbon, how much nitrogen, and the carbon-nitrogen ratio in each of the samples. Okay, next slide. So the next series of figures I'm going to show you are our results. So they show time on the x-axis going from May to October, and then on the y-axis, the amount of carbon, the amount of nitrogen, or the carbon-nitrogen ratio, first in leaves and then a little bit later the moths. So for leaves, next slide, we did find that characteristic decline in nitrogen. So we have about 3.5% of the foliar tissue is nitrogen in start of the season in May, and then declines to about 1.5% in October. That's nitrogen. But for carbon, next slide, carbon's this stays constant, and at about 45%, 47%. So that is basically not changing, whether we're sampling leaves in May, July, October, pretty much the same carbon content across across the season. And we put the two together, next slide. That means there's an increasing carbon to nitrogen ratio. So there's carbon staying the same, but nitrogen declining. So overall, leaves are becoming more carbon and more carbon based as we're moving later into summer and into fall. Oh yeah, so these are for leaves growing the open alvar. We also collected leaves growing closer to the forest, so more shadier environments. But the numbers, the trends were exactly the same, and that's because, next slide, the light environment within which plants are growing didn't seem to influence how much carbon there is, how much nitrogen is, or the carbon-nitrogen ratios at all. So this is a light gradient, where on the left, we have the individual plants we were sampling in the shadier environments, close to the forest edge. And all those dots on the right are individuals that were growing in the sunnier environments. But we can see whether it's growing shady or sunny, it's pretty much the same. We expected more nitrogen in the shady plants because they need more pigment to photosynthesize when there's less light, but it's not what we found. Where we did see some variation, next slide, is among the different species we sampled, here grouped into genera. So Orchitagus are the hawthorns, Nicora is honeysuckle, Populus is all trembling aspen, Prunus are our cherries, and then we have some individuals that's all grouped to another kind of other group. So maybe our trembling aspen has a bit more carbon than the other genera, where our cherries have more nitrogen, potentially a little bit more nitrogen. Cherries may be a higher quality resource, but we didn't actually observe what caterpillars we're foraging on. And we don't really know what most of the host plants are for the moths. So be curious to delve into that and see if there are more caterpillars on cherries than other species. Next slide. Where we did see quite a lot of variation in here, at least here for carbon nitrogen ratios, is among each of these sampling points. So irrespective of the light environment or the species, just being in a different location, it could reflect soils or microclimate. We end up getting quite a bit of variation in carbon nitrogen ratios, at least at the beginning of the season. They all kind of converge on similar values in October, but at the beginning, there's quite a lot of variation. I suspect it's because there's site-to-site variation in when leaves start emerging. Maybe some sites are a bit cooler or shadier. And so if we're coming in May and some leaves have already emerged some leaves might have emerged recently and other leaves might have emerged maybe a week before, so they'd be further along the nitrogen decline curve. And so they might have a little bit less nitrogen. What I think is interesting about this is that if climate change is causing leaves to emerge earlier, then when birds are breeding and requiring moths, they might be they might be foraging at the time when the leaves have already started declining in their nitrogen. So that's something to look out for, is if there's sort of increasing mismatch between nitrogen availability in the leaves and when moths are or when caterpillars are foraging and birds are foraging on those caterpillars, if the leaves are coming out earlier. Okay, next slide. So that's the story with the leaves. What's going on with the moths? Well, essentially no change in the amount of nitrogen, the amount of carbon, or the carbon to nitrogen ratio. Whether we're sampling these moths in May, June, July, August, September, October, it's pretty much the same values. Now, this is not altogether unsurprising because we know that herbivores like insects are called homeostatic. That means they're able to regulate their internal body chemistry, their internal elemental composition, even if their food source is wildly variable. Nonetheless, I think it's really interesting because it means those late summer moths are able to regulate nitrogen when it's limited as a food source. And they're just as good as acquiring nitrogen as early season moths. Early season moths are consuming food much richer in nitrogen. Next slide. And those early season moths are different than late season moths. So this is an analysis that groups points, and points are different traps. And so they reflect different dates in the season. So it groups them based on how similar they are in their species composition. And so what we see here is that there are distinct early, middle, and late season moth communities. So all the traps that we're collecting in May and June are all kind of these yellowish, greenish points. And then we get a kind of a different clumping over here in the bluish greenish points, which are late June, July, August. And then we have another distinct sort of assemblages in September and October in the kind of purples there. Generally, the community does turn over quite rapidly. So even if we're taking the same trap, just 2 weeks apart, or sorry, 1 week apart, at most, they're about 11% of their assemblages are the same genera. So there's kind of very different, a lot of differences that are kind of turnover in the species that we're seeing in the moth traps in the summer. So next slide. So if there are moth aficionados out there, these are the dominant genera we're finding in each of the seasons. With the ones in the middle are kind of the ones that are common to all seasons, but there are some genera that are very limited or kind of have a flight season that is very limited to one part of the summer. So this, I don't know what's going on with these late season moths, but again, they're adapted to these nitrogen limited ecosystems and nitrogen limited food sources. So there's something quite special about them. It could be that they're just more efficient at converting nitrogen into biomass, or there could be behavioral adaptations about what they're foraging on, how quickly they're foraging, how often they're foraging. So that's kind of my next step of my research, is figuring out what are the adaptations for these moths as caterpillars to be able to regulate nitrogen. But the thinking about it from the perspective of a whippoorwill, is there a consequence to being an effective nitrogen regulator that could affect them as a food source for eastern whippoorwill? So it's possible so next slide. So we know from experiments that caterpillars that are foraging on nitrogen limited food, they grow slower. So I thought, well, maybe the late season moths are smaller than early season moths. Don't really find evidence of this. So this is the individual moth body mass. So we take the moths back out of these traps and we weigh them. And so we can see here that moths in May are not really that much bigger than moths in October. And there's actually a more dominant pattern, which is that moths are really big in July, midsummer. Not entirely sure why. This is actually controlling for the effects of temperature and moonlight and wind. So it's not entirely because July is a lot warmer. You can only control that to some degree in these statistical models. So it still could be representing just temperature. We can look at a direct relationship between the amount of nitrogen in leaves and moth body mass. There is a relationship here where moths that are foraging on nitrogen poor leaves are smaller. That's what we see with the black line. That's kind of the average trend. But the gold and the purple is the uncertainty in that relationship. So it's quite a bit of uncertainty. And actually, within that envelope, it accommodates trends that are flat or trends that are even positive. So it just means there's a lot of uncertainty. And I'd be hesitant to say that, yes, moths that are foraging on nitrogen poor leaves are small. And you'll see there are a couple extreme values here that are really low nitrogen and really small moths. So more work to really kind of tease that out. It's also possible that the effect of nitrogen limitation is not on moth size, but on overall moth population size, the number of moths we're capturing in the traps. So next slide. Really no signal of that. So here is the number of moths in our traps. And again, pretty much the same in May and October. We are getting a lot more moths in July. So something is going on in peak summer that's getting a lot of moths. And really no clear relationship at all between the amount of nitrogen in leaves and the number of moths we're getting in the traps. Okay, now what about the whippoorwills? We're talking a lot about leaves and vegetation, a lot about moths, but of course the star of the show is the whippoorwills. So at the same time we're doing this work, we are setting up mist nets to capture whippoorwill, and then we are outfitting them with radio tags. And we're doing that so we can, so then these radio tags, they send a signal every 20 seconds to we have an array of these nodes, they're called sensor nodes set up through the alvar that detect the tag. And then those nodes send a signal to a central sensor station. And so we're able to do that. We kind of know where the bird is every 20 seconds. We're able to look at how often it's moving back and forth between the forest and the alvar, and how often or how much of the night it's spending in the alvar. I don't have that data analyzed yet, so I can't really show you anything about that. But so the tags also help us locate nests. So far, we've found 7 nests, not a whole lot. We're hoping to get more this summer. We've really putting a lot of effort into finding nests, not so easy. Next slide. So if we do find a nest, we can put a camera on it. And so there is Rule on her eggs. And this also helps us, again, monitor how often it's leaving the nest, going out foraging in the hour, and how often it's coming back. Because the more trips it makes, increases nest predation, or the risk of nest predation. So not only is the bird leaving the eggs or the chicks exposed, but it's actually the movement to and from the nest what tips off predators to the nest location. So there could be times of the year based on moonlight, based on resource availability that require the bird to make more foraging trips, especially when they're on chicks, not so much when they're on eggs, but when they have chicks, they have to make quite a frequent number of trips to bring back food for the growing young. If there are opportunities or conditions that minimize the amount of trips it needs to make, that reduces the risk of nest predation. And we want to minimize that risk. Can you go to the next slide? Because sometimes this happens. Yeah, so.
Shoot.
Yeah, so good for the raccoon, not so good for the whippoorwill. So nest predation is the main driver of population decline in the breeding population decline in most birds, including whippoorwill. Okay, slide. So the other kind of data we can get with tagged birds are their migration paths. So I wasn't asking if anyone's familiar with MODIS, but it sounds like you guys are all experts on MODIS now. So this is what you can get with MODIS, with having a MODIS tower. So these are, all these gray dots are MODIS towers. And so as Marina said, they do have a detection range up to 20 kilometers. They pick up any tagged bird flying across. So we've had 16 or 17 of our birds picked up by the MODIS network. And these are their tracks here. I don't know, maybe this one might be, this one looks like it could be passing over Coburg. But they generally, I mean, we're already starting west of here and they tend to go southwest. They kind of go into York region and they keep heading west. Our tracks tend to stop kind of here at the Texas-Mexico border, not because that's where they're overwintering, but that's the density of towers drops out. So we're just not picking them up. A previous study, including colleagues at the MNR, use a different kind of tag for birds. They tagged in Eastern Ontario here in red, and they also tagged birds in Northwest Ontario, Southeast Manitoba, the ones in blue. And you can see that, so it's a different kind of tag, it's a GPS tag. So that means it doesn't require sending a signal to a tower, it doesn't need to be detected by a tower. The disadvantage of the GPS tag is that you have to recover the tag the following year to be able to download the data. So this is kind of with radio tags, it's sort of instantaneous. Like you can check the MODIS website every day to track your birds. Whereas this one, you have to wait a whole year and also have to have good luck and be able to capture the bird the next year. But they did have good luck and they're able to track the migration for quite a number of birds. I can't remember exactly the number. And you can get them all the way to their wintering sites. So the Eastern Ontario birds tended to overwinter in southwestern Mexico and in Central America. The more northern birds actually went further south, even as far south as Costa Rica here. So this is what we call leapfrog migration, when the northern breeding populations actually sort of kind of leapfrog over the southern breeding populations, end up wintering farther south. I'm not entirely sure why this is happening. It could just be that the Eastern Ontario birds here are getting south quicker just by virtue of being closer. They're kind of occupying all the better sites, but really don't know if that's the case. Next slide. Okay, so after conducting the study, thinking a lot about how we can manage grasslands, and in the Alvar, Garden Alvar in particular, for healthy whippoorwill populations. We don't have any long-term data to know the current health of the population, although like everywhere, there's been a lot of landscape change. So likely the population has been declining, and we're concerned about future declines as we've been seeing everywhere in Ontario. Now, I did mention that in the Garden Alvar, there are cattle that graze. So in lieu of having forests keep this system open, we have cattle. And you combine cattle with this intense summer drought, and that does limit the amount of woody vegetation that establishes in the Alvar, which is really good for the whippoorwill. But after spending time in the Alvar this summer, we have an exceptionally hot and dry summer. When you have intense drought, it can easily shift grazing into being overgrazing, kind of exacerbates the effects of grazing, and we can have this intense woody vegetation die off. So I think we need some woody vegetation in the Alvar because this is what the caterpillars are feeding on. So if we lose woody, we tend to think, okay, we don't want any woody vegetation in our grasslands, but I think for the case of the whippoorwill, I think that's actually what helps a lot of the insect populations, or at least Lepidoptera, maybe not some other ones like grasshoppers. And so if we lose the woody vegetation, we might lose the moths. And even if there are caterpillars that forage on grasses and forbs and flowers, what overgrazing does, it tends to favor the establishment of very nitrogen poor plants. So again, it's probably not helpful for the food source of the whippoorwill. So part of where my research is going next is next slide, is to engage with technology to help us monitor all levels of the whippoorwill food web and the sort of the forest grassland mosaic. So one area where people have started technology advanced to the point where we can now use satellite data and LiDAR, light detection and ranging, to actually predict or model the amount of not just the kind of vegetation that's there, but actually model the carbon to nitrogen ratio in a landscape. So this is from a study in China where they did this. And so that means you can kind of monitor changes in the actual elemental makeup of the vegetation through time. Next slide. We started using these moth boxes to monitor continuously the moth community, how many moths there are and what kind of moths are there. What I like about these moth boxes, besides just being easier to put up than these bucket traps, and they're basically a camera trap. So you take a picture, they have a light that attracts the moths to this board, and it takes a picture like every minute, or you can set how often it takes pictures for, and it can do that all through the night. What's great about it is that's non-lethal. So after 3 years of putting out these bucket traps, we've killed a lot of moths. I'm not very happy about that. So I really want to just take pictures of them, and we'll get probably even better data because you can just then run these images through these AI classifiers that the same people building these moth boxes have also been developing technology to identify the moths. And there's a whole community of entomologists and ecologists using AI tools to identify insects. It's a really growing community. There's people interacting and building technology and building these classifiers to do that. And finally, next, we're using these autonomous recording units. Are people familiar with these ARUs? Yeah, they're just like a little box with a microphone, and you just set them up, and then they just, kind of like the moth boxes, you can just leave them up. You can also just leave these ARUs up, and they're just recording all the sound that's around them. You can attune it to certain frequencies, so it's just picking up birds, not being kind of too interfered with from other organisms like frogs or insects. And so we've set these up through the Alvar, and running at night, we're mostly getting whippoorwill, some other woodcock and things like that. But we can also keep them up during the day to monitor all the birds in the Alvar. Now, with all these technologies, next slide. Actually, go back. Not right. So with all these technologies, the bottleneck though is not deploying them or acquiring the technology. It's about what do we do with all the data once we have it. So we have thousands and thousands of images of moths and thousands of hours of recordings. So that's the real kind of challenge, is how do we deal with all this data? How do we identify everything in them? And AI is really growing and helping this, but it's still a learning curve on how to do that. And it's not fail safe, of course. So with that, I do want to acknowledge all the help I've received over these past few years from a lot of support from the Ministry of Natural Resources, financial support, administrative support, and technical support. And I do collaborate with research from Western and from Trent. And yes, thank you so much for your attention. Next, slide, just. Yeah, just if you want to contact. Yeah, email. So please fire away with questions. Yeah.
So if you take your 2023 data, you tagged 15 birds, did you have any of them returned to the LR?
Yes, I know in 2025, we picked up, I think 3 birds that we had tagged in 2023. And we picked up a bird, so all these birds, have the aluminum bands as well. So we picked up a bird that we discovered was initially tagged in 2019 in Michigan. So we had a bird, we looked at it had a tag, not a tag, but a band on it, and we looked at the number, and we wrote the bird banding laboratory, and it's like, what bird is this? Came back, it was bird. And then actually, the person who banded it back in 2019 in Michigan, he actually, I guess he got alerted that his bird was picked up, and he actually emailed me. He's like, oh, I'm so excited you found our bird. And he tagged it, tagged it during migration. I think he said he thought it was during spring migration. So it wasn't seems it wasn't a bird breeding in Michigan. Now it's all of a sudden breeding here. Looks like maybe it was actually moving into the area but he ended up getting it on its migratory pathage. Yeah.
During the nocturnal foraging period for the whippoorwill, is there any possible influence of artificial light sources influencing whether prey, the availability of prey?
Yeah, so I can't give any specifics of that, but that is very likely. And there's been the woman where I had that figure on the migratory paths, that was part of her PhD thesis, and part of her PhD thesis was also looking at the effect of light on their migration as well. So yeah, yeah, I mean, in a sense, what we're doing is creating our own little light pollution with these traps. And so then you can just imagine scaling that up. But what the overall implications are, it's I can't say it right now.
Are common nighthawks suffering from the same issues?
Yes, so they are also listed as an at-risk species in Ontario. They are a bit more general in their habitat, right? You can see them in urban environments. But declining food source is one of the major contributors to their decline as well. As far as we know, we can't say definitively, yes, it's food, or is it declining food because of pesticides, or declining food because of landscape change. All these things happening kind of simultaneously, synergistically. Yeah.
The main predators.
Of whippoorwill?
Yeah.
So, I mean, probably not much taking them as adults, but as eggs, raccoons,
Skunks.
yeah, skunks, squirrels. I haven't seen any cats where we are, but probably a lot of places there are cats. Yeah, so yeah, they just nest, pretty exposed the nests. Just lay their eggs on the ground, they don't really build a nest. Maybe some other birds, yeah.
Does the application of agricultural nitrogen have any effect on the composition of the insect species that are available? Prey.
The composition.
Does it favor certain species over the other as there's more of it adjacent to or in the runoff from agricultural areas?
Yeah, so I'm not sure, but we do know, the input of nitrogen from agriculture is changing ecosystems quite a lot. But the specific changes that might be happening to insects, I couldn't tell. But did you have a question?
Yes, I was gonna ask you, thank you so very much
giving a very interesting talk. Are the grasslands going to be affected by the discussion of the high-speed rail link between Montreal and because they're talking about bringing it through Northumberland and Brown Bridge Lake. That's the
Yeah,
Alvar areas. isn't it?
yeah, it could go through. I mean, like anything that's the tension between people who want to develop and who want to conserve, that's part of the discussion. I did read that their Department of National Defense is planning to put a big sort of radar array really close to the Cardinal Bar. So that's happening more close to where I'm working is that they do. I'm not sure if it's going to be on a former farmland, but it is going to bring like a big large scale development up there. They're putting in solar arrays and things like that. So
Sorry, what are they doing?
solar arrays, like solar farms, these radar arrays. So keep advocating for grasslands, that's all I can say. You have a voice within the ministry up here. Because as scientists, we don't get a direct influence on policy, but sometimes we're asked for our opinions. I always advocate for grassland birds.
Well, what as a club can we do to help?
Yeah.
I think for me, it's about keep demonstrating that there's a public interest in maintaining systems, that they're conserving ecosystems, that there's people going out, people bird watching, people enjoying them, and keep highlighting that there is an economic benefit from.
Can you use the mic?
Oh, sorry. That there is an economic benefit from activities like bird watching, like nature tourism and things like that. That's not the only way to extract meaning from a landscape is based on the kind of financial gains directly from resource extraction. So just by the very existence of the group, showing that there's such interest in natural systems, I think is really worthwhile.
Who's demonstrating it to whom?
Well, I think I think people know that there's being present in the city and province, I think advocating and organizing with the other field naturalist groups and just always being present and being active and making your presence known so that politicians know that you exist.
Elizabeth, did you have a question?
Yeah, how do you keep the cows away from the microphone?
Well,
We did some surveys, some bad surveys, and we really had to pile up a brush around the microphones. But this one you pictured was right out in the open, and for cattle there, that'd be trash.
yeah, we had one of our sensor stations come crashing down and come the antenna. So we're trying to reinforce them. And we get them like with guy wire, just trying to get them into the ground and get them as strong as possible. But yeah, cow roofing, that's something we're working on this spring because kind of
Especially in soil.
yeah, we can't really get them deep into the ground. So that's why we're like have these guy wires and for the whole contraption. Yeah.
So the acoustic monitoring, do you just use commercially available equipment like bird weather, or are you doing your own analysis of the sounds that you record?
I've been using something called hawk ears. So this is to analyze the songs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot, right? Even eBird and Cornell Lab has their own called BirdNet. Google has one that they just released the version 2 of Perch. Hawk Ears was developed at the University of Alberta. Finding that works really well, but the key is that we do have to have humans validate what those algorithms are putting out. And so we still have assistants listening to hundreds of hours of bird song, identifying everything in there. And it's still not clear, the model, incorporating that into building models that we can then analyze. So we say, we've recorded 50 eastern rural, but we have to kind of adjust that based on how many false negatives there are, how many false positives there are, how many errors there are in those detections based on what humans are listening to. and the validation. So that's something we're working on.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was an excellent presentation. And on behalf of the club, we present you with this token.
Thank
And a walking stick that is on a tan card.
you.
Is there any closing? Okay. Closing remarks. So next Friday, next meeting, not next Friday. So the next meeting's on Friday, March 27th, and that one is going to be online. So what's happening in Ontario? Definitely an upcoming issue. Where I work at the Northumberland County Forest, it's pretty bad with ticks. I don't know necessarily about Lyme disease itself, but there's certainly lots of ticks. And just a reminder of our next outings. So March 1st, bird feeding tour. That's on Sunday, I believe. March 22nd is our waterfowl outing, and March 25th, the Turtle Conservation Center. And for that one, you need to register and able to go. So please do so if you're looking to go to that one. And other than that, thank you everyone for coming out for our AGM and bearing with us through all that formalities we had to do at the beginning and the technical difficulties too. It's pretty annoying today. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.